break. So we're going to dive into our conversation now with our fantastic panelists. You've already met Marjella, who is a CEO and co-founder of Data Moran. Thank you for hosting today's event. And you've, of course, met Erin. Also joining us are two heroes featured in the docu-series. We have with us Mindy Grossman, who is partner at the Consello Group, a financial services advisory and strategic investing platform. Also with us, Katie Rowen, Senior Vice President and Chief Legal and Sustainability Officer of Vontier Corporation, which is a global industrial technology company focused on smarter transportation and mobility. So thank you all for being here with us today. A very important subject that needs to be talked about. So, Erin, if we could start with you, please. You already started to talk about it just now. From where you sit, do business leaders have a responsibility to be a force for good for the environment and for society?
Absolutely. They always have. I don't even know where else to go with that. Yeah, you're just choosing not to. So, no, they really do. And I think about that all the time. I even look back on all these situations with companies and environmental issues. Had they partaken, and just on that upfront dealt with an issue and not push the can down the line, how much better off, we would be environmentally. And I'm hoping that companies will learn. I understand everybody does is about profit. But when you start taking care of the environment and being involved in these issues, you'll still get a profit and you'll probably have a lot more yields. For me, it's a corporate model that I think needs to change. And that might be slow to come, but I think it's going to come. And absolutely, there is huge space for companies to do the right thing.
To do the right thing, right? So in this context, why we're here today, ESG, does this force for good translate into a responsible and sound ESG strategy and practice, right? But it seems like for a lot of companies, it's something to be feared, almost something that's imposed on them by the authorities. And it's a view that's perpetuated by some in the media, as you were saying earlier, Marjella. So is it time to change this perspective? Erin says, yes. Mindy, what do you think? We heard you in the trailer saying that ESG is a transformation accelerant, right?
So first off, to go back to kind of the first statement, is ESG important in business? And prior to joining Consello, as someone who ran public companies for 15 years and private companies, et cetera, it has always been the core of the strategy. And as business leaders, we're responsible to shareholders, we're responsible to our employees, we're responsible to the consumers we serve, but we're also responsible societally for what we need to accomplish. And I think for too long, people thought you had to bifurcate financial performance with social impact. And the reality is we have enough empirical evidence right now to know that companies who have focused on both have longer-term sustainable success. So if your decision is not to, you're making a conscious decision to not be as effective in either. And I think that has to be understood to a very different degree today because it has been confusing. It has been misconstrued, but it's as critical. The second reason it's really critical is consumers. Your competition today is not what it used to be. It's the last great experience someone had, and it's their perception of you compared to other people. And if you're not creating impact and you're not giving them the ability to look through the lens of what you're doing on the purpose side as well as the business side, that's going to affect their decision-making choices. And the third is employees. Employees, if you look especially at younger generations, they are making conscious decisions of not only who to buy from, but who to work for. And that's going to be very critical as an organization as we're competing for talent. So all of those things together, are critical, but why is it not adopted? You were using, statistics and everything. I think there's still a lot of education that needs to happen. Education of businesses, education of organizations. That's one. I think the second thing is the ability to really use data and measurement in a simple and understood way. Right now, there is a lot of confusion around that. And I think that's going to, be critical as well. And then the third, having both consumers and, other, shareholders, whomever it is, hold companies accountable for what they're doing that's real and sustainable and will have impact along with the financial impact.
So you can be green and make money, right?
Yeah, shocking. No, seriously. I mean, the fact that we're, having this conversation, but I think a lot of it is, what's your baseline? You have to decide as a company where you can make the greatest impact, but you have to start with a baseline. You've got to be able to use data and measurement. You've got to be able to, at the CEO level, but it can't be the CEO said. You have to embed within the organization what are the goals and what are the things you're going to do that make sense for your business and make sense for, the societally, what areas are you going to focus on? And then you have to communicate that down so every single person in the organization feels it's part of their responsibility in terms of what they're doing. And then you have to be able to have the transparency of being able to report that out, and you have to own it. And I think a lot of people talk about it, but then it kind of goes away, or it's not sustainable, or it's not real measurement. And I think that's going to be very, very critical.
Okay, we're going to be looking at data and the importance of that in a bit. So, Katie, you said in the trailer that ESG is about the long-term prosperity of organizations. It might be obvious to some, but please spell it out for us. Why is that? And from your unique perspective, too, as both Chief Legal and Sustainability Officer.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if you don't think that there's a moral reason that companies have to do right, there's this absolute sort of business imperative, right? It's about driving value ultimately for all of your stakeholders. Mindy is absolutely right. I think the employee sort of stakeholder group is particularly important here, right? You're not going to be able to sustain sort of this long-term enlightened prosperity and drive sort of the innovation engine at your organization if your employees don't feel like, their work has meaning and purpose. They're not going to stay around and work for you. That's critically important. So how are we sort of giving purpose and meaning to work through what we're doing? It's not about compliance. If you're focused on compliance in this space, you're really missing the point, right? It's about risk, it's about opportunity, it's about driving your strategy, and it's about ultimately driving value for all of your stakeholders.
We had the term future-proofing in the trailer, very apt term here. So we got a taste of that fantastic docuseries, Marjella's brainchild. And we keep hearing that ESG can be overwhelming, a tsunami, head-spinning. We've heard these terms. It is so very vast. It is climate, which is, of course, crucial, but it's also so much more, right? Community, human relations, good corporate governance. So, Marjella, how do companies even begin to approach ESG?
Yeah, I think it's particularly difficult for the newcomers and newcomers that might not have ESG experts in-house. And when you then start reading about ESG, there's a lot of narrative out there on standards and it being messy. So that doesn't really help. So I think that the way to get started is to really assign ownership from the top down, realizing that you might not have all the knowledge in the company to really figure out where to best focus on. You have to play to your strengths, because if the issues fit your business, you can also be the most impactful on those issues. And then somehow you need to source that ESG expertise. So whether that is through external advisory firms or with Data Moran, we made it our business model to kind of scale our ESG expertise through tech and look at very large data sources as pointers towards what stakeholders think, looking at media, what do they care about? What are they writing about in terms of your company or industry? The regulators as a stakeholder group. And then from that knowledge, from there, the key is to make decisions. Decisions is not about doing it all. Decisions is about also confidently saying, these are the things we're deprioritizing. And you can be transparent about that.
Well, that's a big word.
Transparency.
Yeah. No, really, because that's exactly what they need to be. And oftentimes I've seen in my line of work, they're not. So if the issue's there, be fully transparent about it.
Yeah.
Right there.
So I think there's two ways to go about it, right? Either an issue is material to your company and your stakeholders, and you do all you can do to prioritize that issue and manage it properly. But I also think there's a lot of value in saying, okay, we're not doing that, and this is why. That's also transparency.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important is to be proactive in what you're doing versus reactive, because the companies have had to be reactive because they weren't doing, that is perceived as a negative. If you're proactive and transparent, that is going to be received as leadership and being proactive.
So leadership and being proactive. So that is back to governance, right? So top down. You've been CEO and you've transformed a lot of big brands, consumer brands, including Nike, the Home Shopping Network, WW, what used to be Weight Watchers. So what does governance first mean to you in practice?
So governance has to be part of overall culture, right? It's not some oversight, right? It's not looking at it from that perspective. It has to be inherently part of the entire organization's culture. What are you looking to accomplish? What are the goals you set out to do? And then you have to own the governance. It's not someone, checking in. You have to own it. You have to communicate it. You have to be out there. I use the example. I came into Nike. Phil Knight had left Nike, and they put in a new CEO, and the company was really in a crisis, a brand crisis. It's when all the labor issues came up, and Phil came back in, and he put in a new executive leadership team, came out with the new mission and vision for the company. And I was hired to be head of their entire global apparel business. Probably the only person they'd ever hired to do that from the apparel business, not footwear. And I was the most senior woman in the organization. And we were trying to change culture. We were trying to change the business, and we'd been vilified, right? And my comment, and again, apparel had the most, significant supply chain, even so much so than footwear. And I said, not only are we not going to be defensive here, we're going to start leading the entire industry in what we're doing in labor practices, in what we're doing in sustainability. We started the first Organic Cotton Council. In terms of internal, I started their first Women's Leadership Council, changed our hiring practices. But I had the permission to do it because Phil created an environment where he wanted to create change. And so we went from having challenges with the brand to being the brand that was leading in every one of these conversations. And all you have to do is look at the stock and market capitalization history of Nike from 2000 to today, right? But it was so critical that everyone be aligned on what we were trying to do. And that experience, certainly for me, taking it forward into every organization and assessing where you're going to make the greatest impact and where the greatest need is.
So alignment, that has to start within. And on your website, on Vontier's website, Katie, it says that you center your approach to sustainability around your people. What does that mean in practice, in reality?
I think it means a number of things. I mean, we decided to have this sort of philosophy and this kind of, framework to keep us all grounded within the organization. And we really, did center it on our team and our people internally. And we feel like if we focus on them first, their growth and development, their safety, their well-being, their family's well-being, so that is more powerfully going to drive better innovations, right? Better planet, better society. And so that's how we frame it up. But I think sort of beyond that sort of basic framework, I think Mindy's right, the top-down sort of focus and having the alignment of your top leadership teams, of the CEO, of the board of directors is absolutely critical. And they need to be sort of telling the same stories throughout the organization. But I also think there's a bottoms-up piece that's really, really important here. And how do you tap into the passion of your employees across the globe? Employees are really excited about a lot of topics under the ESG umbrella. And so how are you talking to them and tapping into that creativity and that passion to kind of scale your efforts and make a bigger impact? Yes, with respect to environmental programs, and you might have like a Green Champions program to do that, but under sort of all the topics under the ESG umbrella. So I think the bottom down or the top down rather piece is critically important, but so is sort of the bottom up, and how are you facilitating that as an organization?
If you think about it, in a world of influencers, which we're all talking about, your greatest influencers and advocates are your employees. And if you have that, and that can be amplified, that's part and parcel of what it is you're trying to do.
You want them to be behind
There got to be
this
some
vision,
leaders behind it.
right?
Believe.
And Erin, you were telling us just now, you're on the board of a health and nutrition company for their ESG. What do you tell them about the way forward?
Oh, it's kind of like we've been talking about. I mean, we think that it always comes down from the top, but I think we're in a pyramid shift that's going to flip. And it really starts from the ground up. And that's listening to and engaging your employees, because there's almost like a hard stop. And if I ever see that wherever I'm at, is when you're disconnecting from them, that's where it becomes a slippery slope. Any company is its people. And I think looking at social and governance and environment and all of these things that, especially the young ones, really want to be a part of or a solution to, is good governance, is bringing them in. And for me, I've always wanted to, and how I ended up being on that board, it's like I get the usual, why would we? I'm like, I want a seat at the table. That's part of the problem. Even in these big environmental situations, companies need to work with the community, with the people, and that's a missing component. Belly up to the table with the people. Belly up to the table with your employees. Have a moment with them in the boardroom. Let them come in and say their piece. And it goes just a huge, huge long way. It starts, I think, from grassroots for sure, and give them that opportunity. I think any CEO might be shocked when they find out what's really going on within. And don't think that they don't kind of get together and talk together, or C-suites get together, and they can shift a bad way. So I always encourage any corporate leader to let them have a seat at the table, because they are a part of the company. As a matter of fact, most companies wouldn't be who they are without the employees and the people and the consumer that's buying their.
And the consumer. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But so engaging with the community, right? It would be a critical part when you're looking at your materiality process, when you're working out, right, what's important for a company to focus on or not focus on, because then you're developing your ESG strategy and figuring out what resources to allocate, right, to. And that's where Data Moran's program, the platform, can come in, and Vontier uses this, doesn't it?
I'm glad you're giving me sort of the moment here to talk about it, because I know you don't want to talk about it yourself. We use it, and I used it at my prior company as well. We're big believers in it. It's an important part. I'd say it's the foundational part of our tech stack. And Pete's in the audience. He said it well. He's one of the heroes of sustainable business. You if you try to boil the ocean, right, you're going to get completely overwhelmed and lost. So what is important to you as an organization, to your stakeholders, both internally and externally? And the environment is so dynamic right now that it used to be that companies did a materiality assessment maybe once every 3 years. We're doing it now on a quarterly basis, right? Because again, the environment is just changing so rapidly. So yeah, I mean, I think having a tool like the Data Moran tool to help you get that focus as an organization and figure out sort of what's most critical to you and your long-term success, what your biggest risks are as an organization, is really, really important.
How important is technology overall for Vontier?
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, in terms of ESG, right? This is the, Data Moran is the foundation of our tech stack, but we have a number of other technologies that we're utilizing. Not to sort of go too wonky or too deep here, but I mean, we have a customizable database that we use that's really critical as we're bringing in data across all these different topics across the globe. We're harnessing APIs to reduce the number of kind of human inputs into that database. So for example, our energy bills flowing directly into our data, sort of data warehouse, if you will. We have an AI powered tool that we use to help us with climate risk and opportunity. So, I'll stop there, but it gives you just a little bit of a flavor of there's a lot happening in this space. It's very dynamic. You need to be harnessing sort of these tech tools. An army of people is not going to be enough, frankly. You gotta work smart, and tech is a real key enabler of that.
So technology can be a game changer, and the right technology can make things easier and faster, but it's got to be the right technology for your company's needs, right? So Marjella, how do companies pick what's right for them, the right tech stack?
I think it's about fundamentally understanding the ESG agenda. So it starts with defining your priorities. So how can you pick a tech tool that supports that? Then it's about goal setting. So you need to, once you know your issues, these issues can only come to fruition if you build some useful targets and goals around them. That's step 2. I think you can get away with not having a tech tool on that one. That's internal decision making. But it would help if you have insights into how other companies, of course, set the targets because you want to benchmark yourself. Then thirdly, it's about data collection. So once you know where the issues are material, whether that's at HQ level or down the supply chain or at the value chain level, to get the data. There's a plethora of tools out there that can support that a lot. We have some partnerships in place, so those are our preferred suppliers, if you will. You can ask us. And then there's of course, the reporting out. So you have to make the story public. You have to make this data speak to different audiences, and there's also tools available for that. So 4 steps really that you should be looking at in terms of tech.
But how do companies start to go, okay, this is what I need, does it start with, I know you don't want to self-promote.
I mean, they can come to us. We have great ESG expertise in-house. We can talk. We actually said it's not enough to just talk about Data Moran. Because of the confusion in the market and because this is such a new topic, we have to go beyond, and we have to be able to say, okay, we believe that the smart way to ESG, and that's a new category, should have the following components, and we advise you to go for the following techniques. And of course, there's also advisors that can support more on a project-to-project basis. Because let's also not forget that ESG, because it's so entirely new, it's a highly entrepreneurial topic. So I recently moved back to the Netherlands. I came across a master's program called Sustainable Entrepreneurship. Everything that deals with ESG is also in entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. Because you need people that are creative around these issues. So you know the issues, you set the targets, you get the data in, you report it out. But what are you specifically going to do? In terms of that, let's go out of the box, right? Let's think broadly. Let's think how we can innovate. Let's think how we can be that company of the future that thrives within the changing environment that we operate in.
I think the idea of intrapreneurship, I think, is really critical because it is newer. Not everybody grew up. And, I always say, if you're running a company, you have to know enough about everything to ask the right questions, but you need to know what you really know and what you need to surround yourself with. And in this particular area, you need that entrepreneurial spirit and understanding what's going to be right for your company. Brought that up. What are you going to build? What are you going to measure? All of that. And you need to have a certain amount of fluidity within that as well as you're building.
Right. And I think when you speak to any ESG leader here in the room, they are an entrepreneur. They have, along, the years that they've been active in this space, tried to invent different things, not only get C-suite's attention, the company's broader attention, invent different programs, different ideas on products and services, how to improve things in the supply chain. This is, highly entrepreneurial and creative work.
Thinking outside the box. Like you were saying.
Yeah, I don't like it in the box.
Mindy, you've gone from CEO to investor now. How has that influence changed the way you see ESG?
So Kinsella is a really unique firm in that we are truly the partner. I mean, we call it advisor, but we are truly the partner to CEOs globally. And we're their partner in helping them continue to create value for all stakeholders. And then we have a whole portfolio of talent and kind of assets that we can apply to that. So M&A and investment, private equity, growth and business development, Kinsella Tech, which is run by Oscar Salazar, who is the co-founder and CTO of Uber, private equity, Peter Morrow, who's here. So how are we helping CEOs across all of this? And in every conversation, there's an ESG conversation. Because again, if you believe, which has been proven, that if that's not integrated in your strategy, whether you're an industrial firm, whether you're a consumer firm, doesn't matter, you are not going to have the same level of long-term success. So that is also our responsibility as the partner to the CEO. And so whatever we build, right, even internally at Kinsella, takes that into an advantage. So even if it is an advisory and investment firm, it was very critical to Declan when he was starting the company. We have one of the more diverse partner groups. That was important to me in joining. We're diverse in terms of the companies we work with and the conversations we're going to have in a boardroom with the CEOs and with the teams. And I think in these environments, I always say, you look at a lot of companies, and the number one thing I believe the CEO has to do is surround themselves with a real diverse group. A real diverse group allows you to have what I call productive discomfort, right? You're having these conversations, whether it's in the boardroom, your leadership team, and you can't do that if you don't have the diversity of voices. But ultimately, what comes out of that is that much more powerful and aligned if you're going to do that. And I think it's the biggest thing that companies have to do right now in order to determine and commit, right, to what their ESG strategies are going to be. Because unless there is alignment, it's very difficult to make progress.
You were talking about the ESG skills gap, right, earlier. What do companies do about that, Marjella?
It's a very uncomfortable topic, I think, because, who likes to admit that we don't have the skills on it? I think it's normal for a lot of companies not to have the skills on it. What to do about it? Get educated. There's many programs out there on ESG education that can give you, I think, a good basis. I think I said it before, stick to the issues also that your business can truly have an impact on. So in that sense, I guess, don't go too far out of the box. Stay a little bit with your box so you can have an impact there.
You got to come out of it though and go around.
Yeah, do a little circle.
Look from outside.
Maybe go back in for a minute, but It's all really true. And I don't know why it is, and I've watched from afar. Even, listen, everybody knows about Pacific Gas and Electric, and it was part of that lawsuit, and there was many to follow that started the film Erin Brockovich. But a very interesting phenomenon. I don't understand the CEOs need to engage with the communities. They need to engage with the employees. The employees were feeding me every bit of information, but there was not a place where they could funnel it to that the person at the top might realize that. So it was interesting after the Northern California fires. The entire board came out of their box and went to the fire zone and saw firsthand what they did. And that was dead bodies, 90 people dead, lives ruined. And I think it's vital and critical and important that a CEO and a board come out and deal with the people, address the concerns, mostly the employees, give them a safe space to have that conversation, to report. You can learn a lot. So that's why I think ESG is so important. The governance is there, and I think it's always been a category almost of its own, thinking that social impacts and environmental issues don't affect governance. Yes, it does. Mm-hmm. So everything that you're saying, I think, is critical, and my observation is these company leaders, they need to step out, and people and their employees often don't know how to approach. I think it's incumbent upon that leader to reach out and engage and start that dialogue.
So, Katie, I'm just gonna dial it back a bit to that skills gap, right? Because that's so important. If we don't have the skills to deal with the problem, then we're not going to get very far, right? So, insourcing or outsourcing, and are you seeing a skills gap in your experience, Katie?
Yeah, I think maybe just starting with the skills gap. I mean, I think there is a skills gap, so I would absolutely agree with that. I think, and it's layered, right? So I think there's some basic sort of skills and understanding of just the landscape that we're all living in, the ESG space, the disclosure regimes, and the like. But then there's this sort of, if you click down a level, this sort of skills gap just related to data, right? And do you have people on your team that understand how to work with data, to analyze data? How do they visualize the data? How do you story tell with the data? How are you using the data? And so that's an area that we've really focused on as we've brought on some new team members, bringing folks who have sort of a data skill set and bring that to the table. I think that's really critical. And then I would also say there's just this, like, even clicking down then sort of another layer is, does it's sort of a communication skills gap or an understanding skills gap, especially amongst, I would say, the top 100 leaders in your organization. Do they all understand what it is you're doing from an ESG standpoint, why you're doing it? Do they know how to talk to their teams about it? Are they talking to their teams about it? Do they know how to answer questions at an all hands when employees are asking questions about, our greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets and the like? And I think you can have the best program in the world, having unbelievable positive impacts across the world, but if you aren't talking about it and storytelling about it, you're just losing sort of the value of your program. And so I think, yes, there's a skills gap, but I think it's sort of this layered gap all of those pieces need to be addressed.
Mindy, what about?
I would agree with that completely. I think communication within the organization is critical. And I think sometimes at the very senior level, they think they put on a big town hall, right? And they're showing video, big town hall, everybody got it, right? It's great to have a moment, but, I used to like to say, when somebody would say to me, are we talking about this again? And I'd say, you're bored with it? Somebody in China is hearing it for the first time, right? You've got to integrate it into everything you do. Just like externally, you have to report to shareholders. Internally, you have to have the conversation about where you are, what's working, what's not, what the challenges are. But you have to keep embedding it into culture, and it goes back to in versus out. You've got to build it within your culture. Now, it doesn't mean as you're doing that, you may not need outside resources to help as you're building, but if it's this thing over here, it's never going to become part of the integral components of what every single person in the organization does. And I also think challenging, no matter what the role is. I always say you can have impact in your first job all the way. You just have to decide what it is you're contributing. So if you go through the exercise of asking everyone, no matter what their job is, how do you think you can contribute? It makes a difference when people feel they own it.
Owning it. So yeah, this is to be part of your organization's DNA, right? So in some companies, governance is definitely not coming first with ESG. Some people who are pushing for ESG, for sustainability in the companies sometimes feel like they're on their own. What would you say to these people, Erin? What's your message to them? Keep pushing, stick-to-itiveness?
Yeah, well, yes, but there's also a little bit of a strategy to that, because if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing and you're not going anywhere, you have to kind of step back. I call it the tug of war. So, and you're getting tugged on like this. What happens when you let go? They'll fall down over there. Don't be afraid to let go. I think that when we do that, we think we've failed. Nope. I'm taking a timeout. That should be your biggest worry, that I'm not pushing, but I took a timeout because I'm rethinking. And I think everyone needs to do that. When you keep pushing and pushing and pushing and you feel like you're not getting anywhere, take a step back, reboot. I've talked about this before. It's like an airplane coming in and you got crosswinds. They don't just keep trying to land and crash. They're going to take off, divert, circle, and come back. Do that for yourself. As one, you can make that change, but when you've got that moment that you're not getting anywhere, disconnect, rethink, have a conversation with somebody, talk to another employee, step back, talk to a neighbor, think of another approach, because what you're doing, if you're not getting anywhere, they're still there. So it's all about a reapproach. I had to learn to do that even in the community, especially working with the people. On first approach, listen, they did not want to hear what I had to say. Sometimes you're really shocking people with information. Wait a minute, are you kidding me? I've been poisoned? Is that why my child died? Is this what's going on? This goes back to respect. And if you're pushing and they're not hearing you, there's a disrespect and a disconnect. Step back, step out, re-strategize, look at maybe why they're not wanting to hear you. And I think that's an important thing to do. I think people think about that. With me, I'm always pushing, but actually I'm not. I'll push, and if I'm getting that resistance and I'm pushing again and I get that resistance, I'm like, that's a moment where I retreat and reobserve what's going on, what could I be missing, and how can I reapproach so they can hear me and I can be heard.
And I'll just add, oftentimes if an employee is stepping back because they're not being heard, when they re-engage, it's with another employer.
Okay.
I just think the other thing that's important is, as much as you can, create allyship within the organization. It may not come from the traditional group you're in, but other people who might have passion. But I also think create allyship outside of the organization. Understand how other people have been able to kind of either break through. What is going to bring small groups together? I think sometimes people feel they have to just do big things right out of the gate. What can you do in a local community that's going to have impact? And give a quick example. When I was at Weight Watchers, WW, we had our mission, inspire healthy habits for real life, people, families, communities, the world, for everyone. Okay, that's a pretty, bold thing. But where'd we start? One of the biggest issues was the disparity of access to healthy living, right? We started in local communities doing walks to raise funds for healthy food, okay? So our coaches were involved, the local communities, people saw it firsthand what it meant to people. The second level was, all right, how do we make this bigger than ourselves? And we said, we can only do so much ourselves. So we created what was called the Healthy Living Coalition. And we got 40 companies, private, public, philanthropic, to advocate, ran a New York Times ad, on this issue of disparity of access to food. What ended up happening, it built upon itself. We identified something called the Emerson Act, which was inhibiting the ability to have food from a lot of different, whether it was restaurants, organizations, because of liability. And we petitioned to create a new act around, food access and waste. And it got approved in Congress last year. So what started, right, we couldn't have done that. That took a number of years, right? And I think people feel they've just got to go out and be big. And just like anything, how things start, how movements start, they start at the ground. So I think even as organizations, to try and do that, you don't realize how much impact you can have.
That's my mathematical equation. 1 + 1 = 2. But in reality, 1 + 1 will become 1,000 or more. And that's that leverage movement. And employees will do it. Even way back in the day, all of the employees got together, and they're the ones that start bringing information. It can go either way for a company. The employees can take you right down. Mm-hmm. And when they start that movement and that engagement, so I think that's a really critical point. And I think about this. If you look at some of these companies in the world, and they instead, joined forces as companies and created that movement, the collection of what they could do would be mind-blowing. And it doesn't. And I think we always wait for it to trickle down from the top and from our agencies. And the real work happens from the ground up. And if every one of us in every community, individually, and then a community, and another community, and another company, and another company, and every single state across the United States of America, visualize that and light it up on a board, you'd actually be getting something done.
What would you tell everybody? What's the first thing they should do when they go back to their office? As far as ESG goes, what's number one? What's next? Marjella.
I always say that everyone should make at least one new friend every week that has nothing to do with ESG and talk to them about it. Mm-hmm. And that's my recurring advice.
Yep.
So I'm not talking about data run here, but that's my practical advice. Ultimately, individuals are making the change happen. Yes, powered up by data, powered up by a tech stack. Let us work on that kind of stuff. But for all of us here, it's about those meaningful connections that get us with a network effect.
Katie?
I would say ask if you're doing enough to tap into that employee passion that many of us sort of spoke about today. I think that's really critical. We went through an exercise where we asked everybody in the organization, didn't matter whether you were on the manufacturing line or worked in a function or worked for a P&L, to look through an ESG lens as you think about doing your job. And the amount of kind of creativity that sparked across the organization and solutions that people put forward from all corners of the globe in our businesses was really pretty profound. So I think tap into the ingenuity and the passion that your employees have relative to all of these topics.
Share learnings, share insights, share thoughts that can be applicable to each of us as humans or to the business itself.
Thank you all so very much for sharing your extensive experience, your tried and tested knowledge. Thank you all for your participation. As we said, it's such a vast topic. We really just begun the conversation, right? We hope you'll continue talking over a drink and some nibbles out there. Our panelists are going to be staying on so you can ask them your questions directly. Thank you all very much once again. Have a fantastic evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.